under
I
participants.
must have, how do I, wait,
How-
okay.
you're
How's
good now.
that?
That's much better.
That's good. Thank you.
We got, and it looks like, if I'm scrolling down here correctly, it looks like we have a quorum if you want to call the roll. It is 5:30.
All right, and forgive me if I call out a name of somebody that's not here, but we'll start with Beth Rahali.
I'm here in Harbor Springs.
Thank you, Beth. Mary Catherine Hanna.
I am here also in Harbor Springs.
Thank you. Emily Dubay.
I'm here also in Harbor Springs.
Jack Deegan. All right, no Jack. George Pete, I believe he said he was going to be absent. Bill Mulder.
Here, Harbor Springs.
Mark Bidet. Andrew Bowman.
Here in Harbor Springs.
Al Dyka.
Here in Harbor Springs.
That's 6. We do have a quorum.
Great. Moving on to the minutes of the January 7th. It says regular meeting. Does anyone have any comments or corrections for the minutes? I believe that that was a special meeting, wasn't it? For the agenda may need to be amended just to say reflect it was the minutes for the special meeting, correct?
Yeah, we should probably, because it's kind of a regular meeting because we've scheduled them out and we know that they're every certain day. We should probably label it as master plan meeting.
Okay.
I had a couple of comments on this. In the roll call, it says that I was in Indiana or in Illinois, and I was not. I was in Harbor Springs, Illinois, Franklin Park, Illinois.
Okay.
And then you spelled my name wrong in a later vote.
Okay, were you able to find that misspelling? Any other comments, corrections on the minutes from January 7th?
It's Emily. I just have a couple. I thought I saw on part 2 of the minutes, approval of the minutes, page 3, you have Victor's stated his, no use of apostrophe. And then I don't think you need apostrophe for its use, negating its use.
Right.
And then further down in that same section, you have my name spelled wrong. Like you have it spelled like Boudet, but it's Dubé, D-U-B-E.
That'll start a rumor.
Right.
Okay.
And then just like a teeny tiny one, but I didn't know on the next page. So it's still under part 2, page 3 at the very top, you talk about Emily Meyerson at the Little Traverse Bay Housing. There's just no period at the end of that sentence, but I noticed like all the other ones have periods at the end.
Okay.
That's it.
Good. Any other comments or corrections?
Not for me.
Okay. With no more, do we have a motion to approve the minutes of January 7th?
I'll do that.
Support?
Support.
Thank you.
Who supported that?
Mary
Kay.
Mary Catherine.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call. Al Dyka.
Yes.
Andrew Bowman.
Yes.
Bill Mulder.
Yes.
Emily Dubé.
Yes.
Mary Catherine Hanna.
Yes.
And Beth Rahali.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item 3, public comment correspondence. Any correspondence that there were a couple emails I know you included. Anything in addition to that?
No, that was pretty much it.
Hearing no comments, do we have, I'm sorry, was there somebody logged in on the phone or no? If I can just skip asking that if there wasn't.
There is no one on the phone right now. I'll let you know. I'll interject if anyone does appear on the phone.
Great, okay. Moving
And no
on,
comments on YouTube.
okay. So we're moving on to new and old business. First item is to elect chair. I guess we do that every year for the 2021 calendar year. So.
Correct, yes. We need to elect the chair for the new year.
And Jeff, just for any new members, do you want to just give us a real brief summary on how that is handled? It's kind of obvious, but.
I think it's the same as anything else. As far as electing a chair, basically someone would make a nomination for who they believe should be chair. If they want to explain a little bit about why, and then someone else would second that nomination, similar to making a motion. We would then have a roll call vote to approve or elect that chair for the new year.
Victor, can Andrew do it again?
Yeah, there is no limits on serving as chair in the
Andrew,
bylaws.
Are you interested in doing it again?
I'm sorry?
Are you interested in doing it again?
Yes, I would.
I might phrase it as willing.
If so deemed worthy, yes.
Okay.
I would nominate Andrew for chair.
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, who seconded that? Oh,
Al
is that
Dyka, Al
Thank you.
Dyka, yep.
Thank you, Al. All right, we'll run through the motions here. Mary Catherine Hanna,
Yes.
Emily Dubé,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Staying.
Al Dyka,
Yes.
and Beth Rahali.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So we'd also need to do the same for a vice chair, I believe. Or no?
I think we used to do that in years past, but I think we realized in the last go around that we don't actually list the vice chair in the bylaws.
It's actually, it's in there.
Do we now?
Yeah. It's in
Okay.
there, yeah.
Is there a motion for a vice chair?
Who is
And
the
that-
vice chair now?
Actually, right now, I don't believe we have a vice chair. I think because last year at the January meeting, there was a limited number of people in attendance, and they opted to postpone nominating a vice chair, and I don't think it actually ever happened.
And then when Sarah Smith resigned, Andrew was a vice chair and he took over that position, so we never filled up is that how it happened, Andy?
I think we had a vote on, but I remember the delay because we didn't have, where we had new members that were going to be seated. So we delayed at one meeting. It was a partly virtual, partly in-person meeting, if I remember correctly. But either way,
Jack Deegan was nominated as the vice chair.
Egan was vice chair, but
That might have been it.
Oh, that could be.
He's absent, so I would nominate him.
my dad always told me, go to a meeting, you'll get nominated. So
I don't think we can technically nominate someone that's not present at the meeting.
Really? We've done it
Oh,
all.
that's too bad.
Certain about that.
It's good punishment.
Mary Catherine, are you interested?
If so nominated, I am willing to do it, yes.
I'll make that nomination.
I'll second.
And that was a motion by Al Dyka,
Correct.
seconded by Andrew.
Yep.
We'll start with Beth Rahali,
Yes.
Mary Catherine Hanna,
I'll abstain, thank you.
Emily Dubé,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
and Al Dyka.
Yes.
And is everybody hearing me okay? I know I'm coming through on Victor's microphone. Am I speaking loud enough or do I
Yeah.
need to?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, motion passes.
Great. Any other positions that need to be filled? I think that's,
No, there's a secretary position, but that's filled with a zoning administrator.
got it. Okay,
So-
I thought that's how we did it. So, moving on to approval of the 2021 schedule. Everybody had a chance. I think there was a second attachment that was sent out. Did everybody saw that from Andy? I think it was.
Yeah, we didn't really change anything in the schedule this year. The deadline for or the meetings are still scheduled for the third Thursday at 5:30. The deadline for the meeting is the day of the previous meeting at noon for submission of site plan approvals or things like that. We did include in the schedule basically the schedules of the other boards in case anybody wanted to see that information as well, so that you had a full picture of what was going on at the city. Any questions, concerns, or thoughts about the meeting dates, times, or deadlines?
I have none.
That looked good to me.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the 2021 schedule as written?
I'll make
I'll
that
make-
motion.
I move we adopt that schedule.
Oh, good. I'll second.
Perfect.
Seconded by Al.
All right, Beth Verhallen,
Yes.
Mary Catherine Hanna,
Yes.
Emily DeBay,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
Al Dyka.
Yes.
Motion for the schedule passes.
Moving on to C, 376 Church Street Special Land Use Approval Extension Request. Just for anybody that's new, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a site plan approval is good for a year. You have to commence construction, and obviously for reasons beyond their control, it sounds like they were delayed. So they in fact have to come back to have the special land use approval reapproved for another, it would be a period of 12 months, I think. That's correct. Yeah. I don't know if there's
Just
some
to add to that,
applicant here, or if Larry can walk us through perhaps briefly summarize the application they made a year ago.
I think Jeff provided you with the memo that I wrote on that just a hair over under a year ago on February 13th of 2020 for our February meeting last year. Some of you weren't even planning commissioners back then, so Jeff kindly forwarded this to all of you kind of this afternoon right before the meeting. Basically, Michelle Crizel presented, who's the architect on the project on behalf of Little Traverse Land Company, presented a special land use request for this guest quarter facility to be added to the residence at 376 Church Street. Planning Commission conducted a public hearing. If I recall correctly, there wasn't any public comments received at that. I went through the whole analysis of all the standards in the zoning code for this in my report. I reviewed that with the Planning Commission last year, and based on the conditions and suggestions that I made in that report, the Planning Commission unanimously approved that special land use request. I know Michelle is in the audience right now with us. She's muted right now, but that's okay. If she would probably like to make a few comments regarding the reason for this hasn't been able to start, other than what she had in her letter, it would probably be beneficial to all the Planning Commission members. Mr. Chair, maybe Michelle would like to address the Planning Commission.
Sure, Michelle, if you can hear us, okay. If you just wanted to give a brief summary of what, obviously we probably all understand why it was delayed, but if you could just fill us in.
Sure. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. The letter is pretty self-explanatory, and the owner is also present. So Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind letting him perhaps summarize too, he'd probably be able to state it better than I would, but for probably pretty obvious reasons. He had fully planned on building this or having this project constructed last year, and things kind of got turned around with some of the contractors and timing. So here we are a year later, and he's hoping to start construction this spring, but we realize that our year is up next month with this permit.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Michelle, has anything changed on this application or any part of the project, or is it still the same project?
Same project.
Okay, thank you.
And I apologize, I'm not good enough at this to scroll down without potentially closing out the whole window. So if the owner's here, just wanted to give a quick statement as to why it was delayed, and then we can move on.
Good evening to the commission. My name is Martin Kroll. I'm the owner of 376 Church Street. Thank you all very much for your time this evening. Yeah, obviously, as the letter stated, COVID got us quite sidetracked. I think we had this approved at the February 21st meeting, and obviously everything got shut down pretty drastically about 30 days later. Frankly, I wanted to enjoy the summer up there a little bit more than work, and it kind of got away from me, but we're pretty close to selecting our general contractor and getting our wood package ordered, but we weren't sure if we were going to make that timeline, and it was getting pretty close. So we thought the commission would view kindly on an extension given everything that's going on.
Thank you. Does anyone from the Planning Commission have any questions for Michelle or for the applicant?
No.
This is Bill. I've got a question for Jeff. Jeff, could you remind me on one of these approvals, does the owner get 12 months to start the construction or 12 months to start it and finish it?
I believe the zoning code states that they have 1 year to start their project. And what we have typically gone with that by is that they would need to pull their building permits and start some level of activity at the site itself. I think the zoning code may state that once they then have their zoning permit, they have a certain amount of time to start a project and a certain amount of time to finish the project. But I think it's fairly forgiving. I think it might be a year or two for that as well.
So this is really just all about starting in the next 12 months.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions regarding the plan itself for anyone that may not have been here the first time? It did, as I recall, it was well presented and did meet all the standards for the special land use, as Larry said.
I guess just as a comment, Mr. Chair and Planning Commission members, if you're inclined to look at this in a positive fashion to extend the approval, I would suggest if you do that, you approve it under the same conditions and standards and given the same site plan that was originally submitted in those conditions that were part of that approval process. Mr. Chair?
Okay. So just so everyone's clear that there's the motion that was made roughly a year ago by Mary Catherine is highlighted now. So that would be what we would be considering renewing, not amending anything. So
that is correct.
If that's agreeable to everyone, would we want to entertain a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to move that we renew the special land use permit under the conditions that were stated in the original motion by Hannah.
Okay. Do we have support?
I will second that. It's Emily.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. We have a roll call vote, please.
Al Dyka.
Yes.
Andrew Bowman.
Yes.
Bill Mulder.
Yes.
Emily Dubé.
Yes.
Mary Catherine Hanna.
Yes.
And Beth Rahalli.
Yes.
All right, motion passes.
Thank you all very much for your help.
Thanks for coming back virtually.
Take care, everyone.
And then moving on to review and discussion of Administrative Ordinance 2021-1. Larry or Jeff, if you could just give us a brief summary of that.
So this was, you know, a year ago, these items were brought to, I believe, the Planning Commission and City Council for discussion. And they were some temporary changes that were made, some of them to the zoning code, some of them to the city code, for some relief for downtown businesses related to COVID-19 and the pandemic. And that time frame has expired, and we're looking at basically renewing these for, I believe it's for another year.
Up until November 1st, 21.
Thank you. And Victor can probably explain a little bit more. This is something that City Council has been discussing, and they wanted some feedback from the Planning Commission on.
Yeah, so I'll take it from here. Thanks, Jeff. That was basically exactly what happened. Was there was just some mention by the council that they would like to see the temporary restrictions or measures that were instituted last year to be again extended for this year during COVID. So through the summer. So as Larry said, through November of this year. The process that we need to follow per Jim Raymer is to, you know, have a public hearing about this at the Planning Commission. So we'll have to have the next Planning Commission meeting February 17th, I believe is when it is, or 18th, I'm not sure, but the next Planning Commission and the third Thursday in February, have a hearing about this and public meeting, I should say, and then council will look at it in March 1st. And a lot of these changes, and very briefly, I'll go through some of them. They're mostly to allow more outdoor activities, such as outdoor dining, curbside pickup, outdoor display of goods in a private parking lot, and et cetera. So the 5 or 6 different measures that are considered temporary relief from the zoning code are there. Planning Commission did approve these last year, and then a council went ahead and approved them. I'm happy to answer any questions about them, but it's pretty much the same exact thing that we did last year, just with change dates and change ordinance number.
Okay. Thank you, Victor. Does anybody on the Planning Commission have questions for Victor about, or I assume everybody had a chance to review these if they are new to you, and but do you have any questions for Jeff or Victor?
I have a quick question. It's Mary Catherine.
Yes.
Sorry, I thought was there somebody else as well?
Go ahead, Mary Catherine.
Okay. I just had a question, Victor, if there was any discussion about some of these becoming more permanent changes to the zoning code, or if it was all just about them being temporary. I mean, I'm all in favor of all of them, but there are a couple that I would love to see become more permanent. So I just wondered if there was any discussion about that.
So there hasn't been at the council level any serious discussion about whether we should make these permanent yet. However, my idea was once we get our results from the master plan survey questions, as well as we as a planning commission discuss these particular measures, as well as the results we get from the survey, we might want to consider making some of these permanent. But at this time, I think without the more extensive analysis, I think while we're going through the master plan update, we should just keep these temporary and then see which ones would need to be or could possibly be made permanent. That's just my thought on that.
I have a question about sort of like Mary Catherine's, but mine was if the restaurant owners wanted to improve on their ideas or like enlarge their eating spaces or make changes, would that be possible when we get closer to spring?
I think there's, and maybe Larry could also touch on this, but I think that can be construed in many different ways, because I guess what we mean by enlarge, are we talking about enlarging their actual space on their private property they can use, or expanding their outdoor area, or going into public areas?
Maybe yeah. I just wondered if they wanted to, if they had ideas over the winter and over doing it last summer, if
Well,
they
actually-
might.
Yeah, Beth, I actually talked to Margot DeMoose, who's a DDA director, and she's going to be reaching out to some of the businesses, the restaurants downtown, to see if they're interested in actually, creating new ideas, new, possibilities for some of these measures. So at this point, we haven't heard any feedback throughout the winter about anything different than what you see in front of you, but we potentially through the DDA might hear more feedback soon.
But it's possible to change them like we did last summer, or maybe if they came up with ideas and requests.
Potentially. It depends on what kind of requests we get. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
That would require the public hearing, right? Correct?
Yeah, these would all require public hearing, the public meeting, because we're creating essentially an ordinance, essentially, from the planning zoning ordinance.
Any other questions specific to the ones we have?
Yeah, related to that, it looks like an owner would have to file an application. Would that have to happen every year, Victor, if they wanted to extend beyond their own storefront? So like Beth said, if somebody decided, maybe I could serve more people on the street, if I could expand both ways.
Well, I believe our current outdoor dining rules require them to submit every year. For
Yes,
example,
that is correct.
Okay.
The paper station, for example, they have to, because they're using the sidewalk space, they have to apply every year. So I guess that would be dependent on how we word any future changes in ordinance. So yes, currently the practice is every year an application.
And that's really above and beyond the special requirements of this, right? If they're going to use the sidewalk, they should file this spring.
Yeah, that's separate, because they can use that permanently regardless of what's in here, depending on whether their application is approved or not.
All right.
As long as it's in front of their,
If they did think of something different over the winter and wanted to file an application for their new configuration, they could do that.
They could do that, and we'd have to review it to see if it's something that we could administratively approve, or if it's something that would need to be taken to planning commission or council for any kind of change in the ordinance.
any other comments, questions about this?
This is Emily. I was just confused a little on like paragraph 3 and paragraph 4, the years on that. So I know one's January of 2020 and then one's February 2021. So I don't know if it was just me or I just kind of read it wrong. I didn't.
Where
Did
are
you
you
guys
at?
talk about this last year in 2020? Is that why
Okay,
that?
Emily, you're on the first page, aren't you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, on the first page paragraph.
On the second whereas, it talks about the planning commission met at a regular meeting on January 21st, and that should be 2021.
Right. Okay.
Okay, and what we need to do this evening, once we get through the question period here, is set this ordinance for public hearing at our next regular planning commission meeting to receive public comments on this, and then we can make a recommendation to the city council on this proposed ordinance.
Correct. And I'll make sure we get that fixed. Yep, that's supposed to be 2021.
So Larry, just to clarify on that, we would have a second, actually during the public hearing, there would be obviously comments from the public, and then we would have a second opportunity to discuss any concerns we might have, either based on the public comments or just our own thoughts on these over the next month before we have the hearing.
That is exactly correct.
Okay, so tonight we're just contemplating setting, and I assume we would want to make a motion to that effect, and then to put this on the agenda for public hearing at the next regular meeting, which I think is February 8th.
February 17th.
Okay.
17th.
18th.
18th.
Oh, is it 18th?
Third Thursday in February. Yeah.
The third whereas is February 17th here, so that we're going to have to get that one changed too, Victor.
Yep, I'll have Jim Raymer get on it.
So with that being said, are we comfortable entertaining a motion to set a public hearing for the temporary conditions in the CBD?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have support?
Support, Mary Catherine.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, we do have support.
Al Dyka and support by Mary Catherine.
Any
I'll
further,
do a roll.
any further discussion? So not. Okay. I'll do a roll call, please.
Beth Holly,
Yes.
Mary Catherine Hanna,
Yes.
Emily Dubé,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
Al Dyka.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. Moving on to discussion of flagpoles, flags, and political signs. Everyone have a chance to read the memo. I think there's some people here in the public that maybe just a quick summary from Larry as to what we've been doing so far with this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few months ago, Jeff introduced the idea that he received several phone calls with comments regarding political signs in the city, and also neighbors who had comments regarding flags on flagpoles and the types of flags and how many and things of that nature. We investigated the zoning code, and we really don't address political signs at all in our zoning code currently. And we have some very stringent regulations regarding flags because it only says you can have a US flag on a flagpole. It really doesn't address anything else. At our last meeting, we discussed general ways to regulate signs and all the decisions that have been made over the last decade or so by the various courts throughout the country regarding this form of freedom of speech. And it gets a little bit dicey. In your infinite wisdom, you asked me last time to look at what some other communities do, because we're not going to be the first ones that invent this topic. So let's show us something that somebody else has done. I probably went through 20 zoning ordinances and sign regulations around, and I ended up at the city of Petoskey and finding one that they have just done a few years ago that basically addresses all of those elements that we will be wrestling with this. Their sign regulations are quite exhaustive, and they cover many topics in a multitude of pages. I have gleaned that down for you and provided you with the intent of their sign regulations on the first page of the memo. And I've provided you, because one of the items you asked for is, what's the foundation and basis for regulating signage? And so the purpose of the ordinance is provided there. Now, this is the city of Petoskey. This is not suggesting that this is what the city of Harbor Springs does. This is what the city of Petoskey does regarding signage. On the second page of the memo, down in Article 2, I have selected several definitions that they use that are applicable to what we're talking about, flags and political signs. They don't, they talk about a political event sign over on page 3, which would qualify as announcing someone for president or someone for city council or someone running for drain commissioner or whatever political office someone is running for. That definition there would be applicable. It's top of page 3, definition number 52. And there's some other, the definition of the word sign itself, number 60 applies. They talk about a residential event sign, and basically a political sign could fall under that definition also. So I've included all of those things for your reading pleasure. And under the general provisions section, starting on page 3, which is their Article 3, they talk about the idea of an address sign and how that works. That's something permitted in a residential district. And then in Article 5 on the last page that I provided you, getting down to how they actually handle political event signs, is they allow them, and they have to be removed within 15 days following the political event. And so in the R1, R2, and R3 zoning districts, which are typically single-family residential districts, similar to what we have as R1A, R1B, R1C, etc., they allow the height of a sign to be 5 feet and the maximum area of signage to be 6 square feet. So if you think about that, that means all of the combined signage on a piece of property in a residential district cannot exceed 6 square feet. So if a typical political sign is 2 or 3 square feet each, you could have up to 2 or 3 political signs total on your residential piece of property. So that provides a uniform regulation for everyone about how many you could have. In terms of, okay, let's go, stop for a second, go back. Anybody have any questions about how they handle that?
Yes, I do. How do
Yes.
they handle it?
Well, from an enforcement standpoint,
Yes.
I don't know that. I did not ask them. I have not discussed it with them, but I would assume, like most communities, if they could do it one of two ways. One, they could have a person that just drives around all the time who's their code enforcement officer and looks for people that have more signs than they're supposed to, and then either knocks on their door or writes them a letter and tells them they have to remove them. Secondly, probably the most common way we see things enforced is a neighbor or someone will call that says, Beth has 8 signs out in her yard, and here's her address, go get her. And so they either contact you by phone or by letter and tell you to become compliant with the ordinance. So, but I'm not sure which way they do it though, Beth.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I guess, Larry, my only question is, I assume that this is a recent enough ordinance that they feel that this would be defendable if they were ever challenged on it. Is that a safe assumption, or?
I would reasonably assume so, but we have not shared this with Jim Raymer. He's our protector from that perspective. But I gotta believe a town like the city of Petoskey has been through this review, both politically and legally, to make sure this is a viable ordinance for them.
Any other questions for Larry so far?
Larry, just one question. I just want to clarify. I think I know the answer, but when we get to this chart about maximum height, they are not talking about the maximum height just of the square area of the sign, but let's say you have legs or like poles on the sign, it can't be higher than 5 feet, even with the poles. Is that, or the legs it stands on?
Yes, that is correct.
All right.
Okay. Now, the very last paragraph there is under Article 6, which is permanent signs, permitted permanent signs. It talks about flags and emblems. And they say that a flagpole cannot exceed 30 feet in height. And they have this language about if you have fewer than 100 primary, 100, I think they say 100 feet of primary street frontage shall be permitted 1 permanent flagpole, and parcels having more than 100 feet on a primary street frontage. And I never could find what they determined to be primary street frontage, but I would assume it's just a normal public street. They shall be permitted 1 permanent flagpole for each 100 feet of street frontage. And they shall not exceed 3 flagpoles. Temporary displays not exceeding 7 days in any 90-day period may exceed this standard. So that's how they regulate flags and flagpoles. Now, Victor, could you go back up to definitions, please? I didn't review that with the, I want to see how they flag, an official government emblem displayed on fabric or any other material generally mounted to a pole. So when they talk about a flag, they talk about an official governmental emblem symbol. So that means that If you went to Adrian or Albion or Michigan State or any other university in the country, you could not display that flag on a flagpole. That seems a little, that seems a
banner?
little severe to me, but that's how they appear to be doing it.
Go ahead, Beth.
What about banner? Wouldn't that cover the college flags and
Well,
municipal?
it's a sign printed or displayed upon cloth or other flexible material accepting national, state, or municipal flags. So that's a different kind of an idea, as opposed to being a flag. A banner is something that could be flying on a pole that says open, or it says Walgreens, or it says party today. There's all kinds of different messages, but they're saying they're accepting national, state, and municipal type flags. So it's not your traditional governmental flag.
And I guess that's helpful, Larry. And I think we, have some time to look at this more closely. Not that we would do exactly what they've done. My personal feeling is we do kind of the minimum that's allowed or required by law that gives Jeff and Victor a tool to, handle a situation when it comes up that, as you said, is normally between neighbors who are having some dispute. I don't know that 39 pages is anything I would have an appetite for. But I guess my thought is we would need some input from Jim Raymer as to what is a good, solid tool in a minimalist format that lets the city, when somebody's really infringing on someone else or imposing on them as a neighbor, that it gives you something that you can go to court with if you have to, but really is not trying to micromanage what people put in their front yard or on a flagpole.
Well, I guess I agree with that, but at the same time, how we do it, I think, is not that hard. It's what we do is the decision that's really important here. For example, political signs, signs that are on your property. Is having 2 or 3 of those political signs on a residential property, does that make sense to you? Or gee whiz, we just had a huge election here. There's a lot of people were running for a lot of different positions, both locally, state, and federally. And is 2 or 3 signs sufficient in that situation? Or should that number be, 6 or 7 signs? And what does that look like if half of the people in the neighborhood have up signs? Not everybody's going to have a sign. And probably not even half of the people will put signs in your yards. But you never think about the worst case scenario, but we have to. And so how many signs are reasonable to be displayed in a residential area?
I guess I'm surprised that they felt comfortable and I'm not criticizing it. I'm just surprised that you would potentially be able to limit it as much as they have, unless people get some really little signs. You're going to have, you're not going to cover even all the local races if someone was inclined to do that. But
right.
I guess I personally feel like we probably need some guidance from Jim Raymer to say, okay, this is something that will stand up, and these are the areas that you can, we know content is not something we want to get involved in or can't.
That's right.
So, and the flag thing is interesting to me, that they feel they can regulate whether or not somebody flies a college flag or, Jolly Roger on Friday afternoon on your porch. I mean, I guess that's just sort of is interesting to me that they
Well, I would want to jump in there, and their definition of flag is one thing, but then if you see here, they say flags are emblems of governmental, civic, philanthropic, educational, or religious organizations are allowed to be on flagpoles.
Right.
So, So I don't think they're as strict as just limiting to government flags.
The definition the definition up above almost made it look like it was more restrictive, but that explains it better, I think.
Yes, it does. Good observation, Victor.
Anyone else have Go ahead.
What Andrew said, my thought is we ought to go with the minimal regulation possible to, give the city folks what they need to regulate in a reasonable way and to, take some enforcement actions in the very, very rare instances when it might be necessary. But yeah, 30 plus pages is really daunting, and boy, that's not at all the flavor that I had in mind for this kind of thing.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, in their whole ordinance, it deals with signs throughout the entire community.
Okay.
The residential areas, commercial areas, industrial areas along the highway, signs is a huge issue. And they're not always in zoning codes. A lot of communities will actually put them outside of the zoning code because it's enacted differently. There's two major differences as to why you put it in a zoning code or outside of a zoning code. Inside a zoning regulation or zoning code is the fining system is just a misdemeanor, and there's no way to sunset and a non-conforming sign easily. And you can't get rid of a non-conforming sign if it was put up prior to the enactment of that sign regulation. In a standalone ordinance, a general law ordinance, as they're generally referred to, you can make them retroactive, and you can enact where someone has the ability, like the city, to say your sign is illegal. You have 7 years we're going to amortize that sign for 7 years. You can have it, and then it has to be removed. And there's been huge court cases over that situation, and in most situations, the courts have upheld a municipal's ability to sunset improper or oversized signs. Now, I'm sure you're all thinking about, well, my gosh, what about the signs we see at Little River, or we see at Firekeepers or other places where they do gaming and such? Because those are sovereign properties owned and operated by Indian tribes, they are exempt from local sign regulations. If that was a question you may have been pondering in your head, because I do a lot, and I think because some of the Soaring Eagle down in Mount Pleasant has one of the hugest signs I've ever seen with their big eagle for their casino operation on the east side of Mount Pleasant. So it's gigantic.
All right, it sounds to me like we might need some offline work. The subject is pretty big, and we can, kick it around a lot on this call, but, could we form a work group or something to have some people just put a stake in the ground that we can react to?
Well, I can certainly do that, and I can send it over to Jim Raymer and just, Jim, here's a draft of an idea. What do you think? And if the metrics of that can change pretty easily from 5 feet height, 6 square feet to 4 feet in height and 20 square feet, if you want to have the ability to have more signs. In my opinion, though, we wouldn't want a 20 square foot sign, though, on a property. I'd want to put a maximum size, like 3 square feet in a residential property of any one sign, but the conglomerate total of signage cannot exceed, let's say, 20 square feet.
I think that makes sense. And Victor, did you have a comment, anything that was on online or?
I don't have there is a comment from John Leo, and John Leo says, I think Andrew and Bill are correct. Minimum regulation to provide a tool to the city to deal with complaints. We should not attempt to limit people's ability to express their political opinions. As long as the signs are removed in a timely fashion after the election, we should not overreact. My one comment about is I think we need to provide Jim Raymer with more than just, Jim, can you see what meets the law, and go with that. I think as a planning commission, our goal is, this is the vision of what we want the land to be used like? So is it the Planning Commission desire to allow people to put as many signs as possible, or to put as few as signs as possible? Or is it to limit, the height and the size of the signs, the number of signs? Those are the things that I'm sure Jim Raymer, if we tell him to give the most minimal restrictions, we could find a way to do that, but we could also find ways to go the other way. Like, we don't know until it's tested in court, I should say. So really, because if we put the most minimal restriction, it's like, all right, you can have 100 signs on your lawn, but the reason we are here today is because we have complaints from the public about the number and size of signs. So I think we need guidance from the Planning Commission on what you feel is appropriate number of signs and size of signs. That'll give us direction.
And Victor, I should clarify, I didn't mean minimal restriction in terms of most permissive. I guess I meant, it always feels like we're treading into something that we can't regulate. So I guess it would be helpful to have an education of, obviously Petoskey felt comfortable with 2 to 3 signs depending on the size. If that's the case, then I think everybody individually on here probably has an opinion as to what the right number is, and maybe we do come up with kind of a range in terms of thinking. It's easier to think of numbers of signs than it is just sort of this abstract, square footage. But Larry's point is well taken. You do have to limit the size of an individual sign, because if you let them go too far, it could all just be one in one area. But in looking at how we could kind of move this forward tonight, does everybody feel comfortable with the idea of having Larry sort of frame in, and again, to clarify, we have a fairly extensive sign ordinance or components of the zoning ordinance that regulate signs in the central business districts and the B1 and B2. So this really is independent of that. They're related, but it isn't as though we would be throwing those out and these would replace them all. Correct?
Correct. It's my understanding we're really just trying to handle the residential areas in the city, not the entire city.
So I think, and there is a comment from somebody, I'm sorry, I can't see, is it from Nancy?
Yeah, Nancy's saying, I think we need to be careful not to overreact.
And I tend to agree with that. I think that really oddly enough, I think a lot of the reason Jeff came to us first was a dispute between neighbors who potentially have a history, and it was over a college flag. It wasn't over what we're all sort of thinking of right now. So I guess
there was both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess to explain that a little further, I have received a couple complaints regarding political signs, mainly the number of signs. And mainly part of the reason for coming here is right now our zoning code does not permit any political signs. So if I'm to follow the zoning code as it's written now, we would go throughout the community and remove every political sign. And what we have typically done with temporary signs in nature, such as garage sale signs and other things like that, that's something that the police department has handled in the past. And what we do is we just remove the sign, take it to the police department, and it's available for that property owner to come and collect at some point in the future, with the understanding that they need to follow whatever the rules are. So, that's mainly why I came here, because I had a strong feeling that if I did go out and just tell people you can't have any political signs, that very quickly they would be coming to City Council, Planning Commission saying, that's wrong, we don't. And I'm sure that City Council and Planning Commission would both probably agree that that would not be the right move to do. So, that's the reason.
Jeff, that's a helpful reminder, and as to why, we obviously have to do something. So I guess unless there's objections to this, I think the next move is to have Larry sort of frame in, based on, his knowledge and maybe some of the things we're learning from the Petoskey ordinance, a basic framework that would provide that tool, that it's permissible, but it is regulated in a way that we all feel comfortable with, in terms of not suppressing anybody's rights to express their opinions. But I think for tonight, that's probably the best we can do. We're not going to hash out what the right number is, at this point.
I would suggest, though, being we've had I think a good discussion about that, and I think everybody has a good understanding of it, give that some thought, of what, 6 square feet look like. That's 2 feet by 3 feet. That's not very big. What's the size of a normal political sign in a residential district, which is about the size of a real estate sign? And I think we're all familiar with those because those are always there, year round in the community. So you walk up in somebody's yard or ask one of your realtor friends, how big is a real estate sign?
I'll drop it off at anybody's house.
Political sign is 18 by 24. That's kind of the standard. And I was definitely part of the problem with the election. And so that's 3 square feet on one sign right there.
Okay. And so just think about that. And when we come back with next time we meet, I'll have a basic regulation framed, and maybe I'll leave those numbers blank, and then we can kind of start to put those in and see if that's a framework is something we want to work with. So a little homework.
We can still decide that we don't want to regulate the number of signs or the square footage, right? I mean,
Then we can do that too. We can just let somebody put up 50 signs in their yard. Then I'll let the city council deal with that one.
There's a comment from John Leo. It would be helpful to know how many complaints have been received, of what type and when. Don't we need details to base decisions on? And generally that's true, but in this case, we have an ordinance that says no political signs are allowed at all. So whether we have complaints or not is not really going to help us solve the issue of how many signs we should have or shouldn't have.
We've already solved the problem. You can't have any.
Right. We have.
Jeff doesn't like the smell of tar and feathers, though.
No. Let's try to keep him around. So
yeah.
All right, I'd say if you can do something offline and give us a framework, then we can talk about the macro issues of whether or how to regulate.
And in the meantime, I think Larry's point, if everybody could sort of, we're all fresh in our mind now because we've seen them a lot in the last 3 to 6 months. So, but it's going to be a judgment call. But what is hard to say what's too many and what's too few. But I think that we all need to think about that and help Larry with some parameters next month. So, is that acceptable to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. And moving on then to member comments. Do we have any comments on anything?
We had some old business we wanted to follow up on from the discussion we had regarding restrictions on quarter usage. And I believe where we left that is we had a good, robust discussion about who can stay at your guest quarters and how long they can stay. And there was a proposal to remove those restrictions. I think Jeff and Larry were going to think on that a little bit. And Jeff mentioned he might go back and research, 15 years ago when the ordinance was enacted. But we ought to either make a decision to move it on to a public hearing or send it to council or to kill it so that we're not wasting another cycle.
And Bill, just to clarify, it would, definitely would require a public hearing to change that. And I'm in favor of kind of bringing it up and looking at it. And I guess if we could, Jeff, and Larry, I know you guys are quite busy, but if we could have some of the history of the ordinance, the 21-day requirement, I am not comfortable with just taking the lid off and potentially having those become short-term rentals, which I don't really think is the intent of what we've discussed, but was more maintaining the fact that it can't be a rental property or a unit to be rented. It's just, we're not going to try to enforce a regulation that's pretty hard to track, and I don't think has been a source of a lot of complaints as far as I'm aware.
What another thought on this, and it's not like a scapegoat for right now, because I think we're right on the cusp of making a lot of very important decisions about the future of Harbor Springs with dealing with the master plan. We're collecting ideas. We're hopefully that when we meet again in a couple of weeks about the master plan, Victor and Jeff and I can have some ideas about what the citizens are saying through the surveys that we've had, and we need to start knitting part of that together. The idea of guest quarters and housing is, it falls the guest quarter idea falls in that category of housing. I would hate to make a decision on guest quarters because I think that's a huge topic, and it will have a tremendous impact on our community depending on what we do with it. And I certainly don't want to make a bad mistake with how we go on that. I want to be very cautious. I want to really talk about it and flush that out about all the ramifications. We're starting to see some data come in that we need to figure out a little bit more because it's a little bit alarming, I think. And Victor and I and Jeff are starting to have discussions on that amongst all the other crazy things we're doing right now. And
What are you alarmed about, Mary?
Pardon?
What are you alarmed about?
It's utility usage is the big topic, and it's important. We're trying to figure out why some of the numbers are where they're at today versus where they were a few years ago. What anomalies are going on, but I don't know. I just have just the tip of information right now about that, and I'm not comfortable talking about it because I'm not sure what it means because there's a lot of different elements that are associated with the topic, and I haven't explored them all yet. There's other utilities that we need to look at to see how they're doing right now in terms of trends, and it's important to us because when we have to start increasing capacities at spending millions of dollars to do that, that has a huge impact on the city of Harbor Springs, and I want to be very careful. But I'm just saying there's lots of things going on right now. Nothing's being lost. There's no reason for us to get in a hurry about guest quarters, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. You need to tell me if I'm wrong. But I'm suggesting to you we hold guest quarters, we hold some of these things, just hold them still right now for a few months until we're done collecting data and having more in-depth discussions on some of the key topics in the city.
Larry, I agree. There's not a hurry to change this, and I think that something that maybe would be helpful because we do have, fortunately, we have a lot of new members who are participating at a high level. I'd like, if we could, I know this falls on Jeff, if you could just perhaps find the minutes and and I think it might be helpful to see, I don't know how many direct public comments make it into the minutes, but I think it would give you a flavor of what we went through when we did this, when we actually made these possible under the 21-day limitation. And really the only reason the 21-day limitation was there was, as my memory of it, was to absolutely ensure these do not become rental units. And that was what I'm echoing what I remember hearing from the public most emphatically, was they did not want a backyard apartment or, and at that point, frankly, short-term rentals weren't really on the radar nearly as much as they are now. So the problems we may incur by doing what seems like a fairly simple change, if we don't have something in place that really ensures, other than the applicant's special land use just swearing on the zoning code that they won't rent it, I think we are going to need a tool on the rare case that it becomes an issue, and we know that we have something that can slow that down. Because unless the public sentiment has changed dramatically, it was very much against backyard apartments for rent, and that's that kind of thing. So, but I think my memory's not that great, so having the history of it, at least in our packet for review, would be very helpful. So,
good idea. In fact, I found some notes today that a subcommittee of the Planning Commission back in 2002 or 2003 made, and it's like a full page of concerns with guest quarters. I will get that to Jeff so he can distribute it to you with those minutes.
Right.
I forget how when we adopted this and the amendment to the zoning ordinance and when this subcommittee met, but I just was looking for something else today and I ran across those and went, okay, you just reminded me of that. I will get those to you.
Great, thank you. Bill, is
I just want to add on to, not related to the guest quarters, but related to Larry's comment about pausing a little bit to see what this master plan process, how it unfolds. It might even affect, for example, the sign discussion. I mean, a lot of the responses that I've seen back, written responses from people in our survey so far have been how they're upset by the number of signs throughout the entire city. Like there's just way too much signage all around the city. So I think it might even be good to have that information before we make a decision about exactly how we're going to proceed with, signs. Granted, many of the comments in the surveys were about the wayfinding signs that are downtown and throughout town, but there's still concern about way too many signs in the city. So I think it's none of these decisions are urgent. These topics I think we should really wait for any big decisions or big changes in zoning ordinance first to see what our master plan survey results say and what the planning commission wants to do with updating any potential goals and objectives and actions in the master plan.
I'm good with that. I don't want to have us just be really lethargic if, that the proposal struck us all viscerally last time, about the regulation that seemed overly strict and impossible to enforce. So, but it makes sense what Larry's just said. Let's get some data, get some more information, and put it together. But I think we ought to talk about what our time frame is for the master plan. I mean, at our current pace, I see this thing dragging out, till late in the year. And if we want to have some meaningful public hearings, we ought to talk about how we're going to do it this summer so that we can get all of our residents to participate. Victor, do you have a sense for what our timeline is on that? Or do you have something in mind?
So yes, I do have a general sense. Our next goal was to present the survey results to the planning commission on the next planning commission in February, right? So
Right.
then we would imagine the March meeting would then start the planning commission taking all of that feedback and then deciding whether or not they need to change goals, change, edit objectives, and change or edit land use discussion, the land use section. And I imagine that could take 2 or 3 meetings, depending on how deep we want to go in making those changes, how we feel, how many changes we feel need to be made based on the feedback we get. So I can imagine that we're looking probably at a summertime, probably June, July public hearings on the master plan. That's my guess, but I mean that could all depend on, we might feel like we need to delve much more deeper based on the public feedback we get, or we might look at the public feedback and say, you know what? Pretty much what we have in our existing plan is pretty much lines up with what the public feels right now. So, it could all depend. I think after we review the results next planning commission meeting from the survey, I think you'll have a better sense of exactly how much needs to be done going forward. But I would anticipate, like I said, a summer public hearings and probably a final plan in place by early fall.
Thank you, Victor.
My sense is maybe next meeting in 2 weeks when we're looking at the results, we talk about firming up a schedule and an objective because, I think we ought to have some meaningful public hearings if we're going to do it in July and or August. And maybe we need to work towards that. And if we have to have more work done in advance, then we ought to adjust our schedule to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Well, just as a reminder to the planning commissioners, last November, I provided you a memo, and I more recently had Jeff provide it to you, a month ago, and regarding positives and negatives from your perspectives individually. I've gotten 2 people to respond to that so far. I find that extremely important because it lets me know what you feel as a planning commissioner, what's important to this town. What do you want to see preserved? What do you find to be important and things that you recognize need help in this town? That's not the general public. The general public, we're going to get their input. Your attitudes, your perspectives, though, are very important to me because you're the ones that are going to vote on this and you're going to respond to the public, and you represent the public, all of you, from your representative areas. And it's Bill, I appreciate you saying that you're not sure where this thing is going. I'm intimately involved with it, and I'm having a hard time getting anything out of you, and you are my client. Is that a little frustration on my part? Yes, it is. It discourages me that I've only had 2 people respond, and the 2 people that responded, like I told all of you before, it is what you tell me is not going to be public at all. I'm going to put all of that into a big memo. This is your perspectives, these are your ideas, your concerns, without identifying who said it. So it's not like I'm trying to sort out anything bad or good or anything. It's just I'm trying to get input. I need some direction.
I've been puzzling over that thing, trying to figure out how I would respond, and exactly what would be helpful for you. Is anyone else puzzling over that? Or
I was going to say the same thing, Bill. I mean, part of this is, of course, I feel totally defensive because I had every intention of doing it and I didn't, because I pulled it up like 4 or 5 times and sat there looking at this blank piece of paper, trying to think, how do I frame what it is that I want to say? Because it's way too open-ended. Like, what do I appreciate about Harbor Springs? I could write you a novel, but what are the things that I think could be better? I could write you another novel. So I don't.
I didn't give you a ream of paper though.
Well, that's it. So how do you distill that down into some salient points that are actionable? I found it really, really hard to figure out how to respond to that, Larry. So I will struggle with it some more. I promise, but I found it really hard.
Well,
Can I say something?
Sure.
I've been working on it this week, and it is hard, Mary Catherine, but it's thought-provoking. It takes a lot of work, but that's what our job is. It's open-ended, but it's what Larry needs. But I was surprised at how much thought needs to go into it, but that's our job. So I apologize for it being late, but
no, that's all right. But maybe it's something we should do at the next meeting if we have time, or at a meeting where we as a group brainstorm your ideas of positives and negatives as a group, because I know it's you put one person in a foxhole and they can't get anything done. They're all over the world. You put 2 people in the foxhole and they can fight off a whole battalion, okay, because they support each other and they feed off of each other, and that energy is contagious. So maybe my approach to this was wrong. Maybe I should have just said, we're going to take an hour tonight and we're going to talk about positives and negatives. Positive views of the water are absolutely wonderful. The trees on the bluff are fabulous. Our view from the bluff is wonderful. I love there's all kinds of wonderful things that I can think of that I would not want to see lost in the city of Harbor Springs. But I don't live there. I've been hanging around for 30.
Individual work is important because you'll get more diverse ideas.
Oh yes.
Too.
Oh yes.
And I'm guilty of not having gotten it done, and I have pulled it up.
I wasn't indicting anybody. No names were mentioned, you guys. This isn't a confessional, all right?
No, that's all right. And I have tried a couple different times, and the fact that the fact that I can't just rattle it off and hand it in like a homework assignment, to me, speaks to the significance of it. And if you are getting kind of stuck, I think the good thing is we all are. It's easy to list off, the physical things that you see around town that make it, the reason that everybody on this call tonight is living here. But it's the other things that are more intangible, I think, that make people stay, and that make people vacation here for 5 generations in a row, or live here for, so I think it's, the only thing I can come up with that I've written down a couple times is if it's an incredible place to live, it will always be an incredible place to visit. And that's something that we need to keep. To me, my main focus with all this is that we have to make sure this is really the great place to live. Think of all the great places you visited. You know, it's always the people who are living there that you feel like are getting away with something, because it's, you know, it's, everyone wants to visit Disneyland. Nobody wants to live there. So that's what I kind of keep coming up with, that kind of thing, as opposed to, you know, physical elements of it. So I guess for the sake of the discussion tonight, I think if we could all try to get this to Larry, you know, in advance of our next special meeting, which is 2 weeks. And I understand if you've got writer's block, it's, you know, but just do the best you can. If we could do, or throw out the form and write a little essay, which is where I'm sort of leaning. So whatever people can do to contribute would be helpful. So is that, and for the, you know, for the sake of the discussion tonight, hopefully that kind of cements the importance of it all, because we are struggling with it, you know.
Okay.
Flights are easy. This stuff's hard. So.
Larry, thank you very much for mentioning that we're holding you up, and that we really appreciate what you're doing. And thanks, and always be straight with us like that. That's great.
You know, that's why I'm here. So just to help.
And there's some teachers at the high school still that can tell you that mine's going to come in right at the 11th hour. So
I understand. I'm the king of procrastinators. Okay, like all of us are, because some of the habits we picked up in junior high school. Okay, that ages me right there, right? Junior high school, as opposed to middle school. They don't leave us. We're all procrastinators.
Well, we're trying, and we'll do our best to get those in. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other member comments on any other topics this evening before we adjourn?
No.
All right. Thank you all very much. We'll probably do this in person someday again soon, I hope. So
hopefully.
All right.
Hopefully.
Thanks all.
All right.
All right.
Have a good one.
Night.
Goodbye, everyone.
See you guys. Thank you.